Hi, everyone. While you're waiting, there is a link up for anyone looking to access the free Oracle Cloud Infrastructure training, as well as the certification exam, so you can harness the power of OCI. We do also have a brief video that walks through the free OCI training, as well as the certification exam.
Welcome to training on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, brought to you by Oracle University. This is Oracle's official collection of courses to teach you the OCI concepts, from the basic to the advanced. These courses will help you get certified on OCI. We offer multiple certifications, with each certification tied to a specific course. Our courses are created by Oracle experts and updated regularly. You'll even get a chance to try out the technology directly by using Oracle's always free cloud services or free trial accounts. Our learning experience lets you learn online, anytime and anywhere. You can even track your progress towards your goal online. Learn all about the fastest growing cloud platform and build your cloud career on Oracle Cloud.
All right, we're going to begin here in just a few minutes. While we allow everyone a chance to join, we do have a free tier cloud account link up for anyone interested in trying out Oracle Cloud Services. If you sign up now or within the next couple of days, you'll also receive additional credits. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor Arthur, and I'm a marketing intern for the Developer Initiative here at Oracle. Thank you for joining us today at Oracle Cloud Coaching, How to Leverage Identity Cloud Service. We're excited to be able to share with you how you can use Oracle Identity Cloud Service as your identity provider and explore its features such as single sign-on, adaptive security, and multi-factor authentication. If you have any questions during the webcast, please ask them in the Q&A area and we'll answer them live after the presentation. This webcast is being recorded and we will make it available shortly after the webcast concludes. Today's webcast will be presented by Neil Friesenhahn, Cloud Engineer. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Neil.
Thank you, Taylor. Yep, I believe I've already been introduced. We'll be covering Oracle Identity Cloud Service today. We're going to start off with a brief overview, and then we'll go and jump right into the demo. So Oracle Cloud Identity Service, or IDCS, this is at a high level what the service provides, and it can roughly be broken down into these three buckets. First up, inbound authentication and SSO. So how do we get it? Does a user get authenticated, or how do they even sign in, right? So if the user resides in another identity provider, you can log in by federating with IDCS through the IDP. And this can be in the case with other identity providers through that support SAML. We also support social login. So for users that exist on other social media platforms, you can allow their users to sign in through IDCS that way. Or if the user exists within IDCS itself, you can manage the login and evaluate the sign-in through adaptive security through analyzing factors such as multiple sign-in attempts or their geographic location to assign a risk score that determines if they can log in. And then we have our multi-factor authentication, where IDCS can also prompt the user to verify by means such as SMS, email, one-time password, or push notifications to a mobile authenticator. All right. Next up then, we have our identity store and lifecycle management. So how do we manage their access once we get them and know who they are? We have our app catalog, which allows us to grant access to those applications and to find them in IDCS for some of the most popular available apps. We have over 1,000 entries already. And if it doesn't exist within the app catalog, you can also use our built-in wizard in the IDCS console or one of the templates in the catalog to add the application. And so long as the application supports a standard such as SIM, OAuth, OpenID Connect, odds are the time it would take you to create the application in IDCS is not much longer than one that already exists in our app catalog. And this extends to our provisioning bridge as well. If the application supports skim provision, then you can configure it in IDCS to import or export your users to and from your application. And finally, we have our outbound authentication and SSO. So I already mentioned federated SSO. We also work as the service provider or the identity provider, both ends. SAML and OpenID Connect are both common federation protocols that are supported by IDCS. We also support single sign-on to Oracle database and VPNs by our Radius proxy. For Linux VMs, we have our Linux PAM module, or pluggable authentication module, to allow us to use IDCS security features such as prompting for an additional factor through MFA, or using our sign-in policies to control who has access to those hosts. And finally, we have the application gateway, which supports SSO through headers for applications that don't support federation protocols themselves. So that's just a brief overview of identity management and some of the core functionality of IDCS. So what does that look like within it? Okay. So this is the Identity Cloud IDCS console, right? I'm currently signed in as the administrator. And right off the bat here, we can kind of see what's some of the actions that we can perform, right? Be it onboarding users and groups, applications, we can audit the system, users and groups. We can manage our security settings. We can perform self-service diagnostics. We can customize it, as you can kind of see here. Let's change the icons, and we can perform end user self-service. So I just want to quickly take you through the console itself real quick here. And then we'll go into how we can add an application. So here we have our users tab. You can see all the users that are currently in IDCS. Their evaluated risk if you have that feature enabled. And if you just want to add a user, you can add them in the console itself. Sorry. Let's see, just Cloud C for coach. And then you can optionally specify whether you want the username and email to be the same, or you can have them different. But when this user is created, they will receive a notification email that they've been added to IDCS. I'll prompt them to reset their password. And at time of user creation, you can optionally specify any groups that they should be assigned to. So, we can assign them to the demo group right off the bat here. Similar to users, when you create groups, and give them a name, get optionally description. You can also specify whether or not users can request access. And what this means is that when users are within the IDCS, they can see the group as publicly view the group, and they can ask to submit a request to join it, so that instead of, say, having an admin having to assign them to groups like we can do here, users can request to join that group and give themselves the permission. All right. This is the applications tab, where you can see all the applications you have configured in IDCS. We'll be exploring this later. Similarly, we have all of the Oracle Cloud services that are in IDCS, and this is where all of your PaaS and SaaS services that you provision in the OCI, your tenancy, would show up here. Jobs are the tab where you can manage how you, submit jobs to export users within IDCS. Reports, this is where you view all the audit information regarding to IDCS. So within the system log, you can see all the activity. You see a lot of sign-in, a lot of user groups created, all by me. Optionally, you can view successful login attempts, unsuccessful application access. So you can see that my provisioned user is trying to access a specific application or that I've been accessing, say, IDCS itself, that's logged here. And then there's optionally the diagnostic data, also the diagnostic data. All right. Mentioned before that you can change the way it looks. You can add custom branding, change the name when you sign in, various login. For email templates, you can have special headers. You can also optionally specify in the type in, going back to that user that created, they'll receive a welcome email. You can customize that here as well. And one last thing is under the downloads, this is where you'd find all the various SDKs or application gateway, the Linux PAM module, or the Radix proxies. All those features that you'd need to install on clients are available under the download sections and settings. Finally, we have under our security, we have all of our administrators. If you wanted to, say, delegate administration to other users that are within IDCS, you can optionally specify them here. So say we want someone to be able to access those SDKs that we mentioned previously, we need to grant them at least security administrative access so that then they can access and download those files. We have our adaptive security, which turns on the threat risk evaluation for users. It takes a little while for them to build up a profile, but when they do, you'll see either a green check mark or it's red that they're at high risk. We have our identity providers. I already have some configured here, such as username, password. It's a default local one to IDCS, but then we have some that we've also configured, such as Okta or Microsoft. We'll touch upon IDP and sign-in policies when we go and create an application. Network perimeters are just a way you can define, a network perimeter. What it basically is a list of IPs that you can then perform write sign-on policies for, I should say. In the case of mine, you could add like a single IP address so that only traffic that originates from that one IP address gets access. Or let's say you have a VPN network or address range that you want to protect, or all your traffic should originate from, such as your on-premise. You can specify that range to restrict access there, and that's defined in application or sign-in policies. And finishing up here, we have all the various factors for multi-factor authentication. You can choose which ones you want to enable. Going further, you can get into the details for the specific factors, such as the mobile app, the phone number, security questions, and some of the specific details related to them. Okay, so that was a brief overview of just the console itself, but let's actually put it into practice here. So I have an existing application that it's just a simple web page that is currently running on Node.js. Accessible here. It's a public page, and I want to secure it with IDCS. So I want to be able to sign in. You can find the tutorial for what we'll be doing here at this web link here. And it just goes through steps that we'll be kind of going through today, but with the addition of I'll be commenting on it during today's session. So first up, we're going to be wanting to create an application so that we can grant the web page or web app access to IDCS's API. So we'll be creating a confidential application. As it says, create a web server or server-side application that uses OAuth 2.0. We'll just give it a name here. Let's just say cloud. We'll take that application URL that I've already created. Optionally, you could specify a custom login URL, logout, error, and linking callback. What these are for is within IDCS, you have a My Apps page. And if you were to go into it, you could see all the applications that you have been granted access to. And When you click to launch the app from there, it will take into consideration the custom login URL and redirect you there first instead of straight to the application. We're not specifying that here, so whenever you launch the application, it'll take you straight to this URL. We also support tagging within IDCS and the display settings. I already mentioned the My Apps page, but this just determines whether or not it shows up. And then request access, similar to the groups that we mentioned, how users can ask to be assigned to an app instead of having an admin have to manually assign them to it. All right. So that's all the configuration will be done on the details. So we'll want to configure this client at the moment. If you don't know the information at the moment, you could always click and optionally edit it later. But since we already know, we need client credentials and an authorization code. For the redirect URL, we can, similar, since my site's not HTTPS, say non-HTTPS, and we just have a simple callback URL. But technically, you could have it point to any URL once you've logged in. So I could send it back to Google once I successfully log in, but or cloud.oracle.com. All right. Here's where we actually get into sort of the permissions itself, right? You know, at the moment, we're not specifying any resources for this application since it's not and doesn't need access, I should say, to other applications within IDCS. But we do need access to the application IDCS APIs itself. And I just want to talk a brief moment about IDCS's API. So everything that you've seen here in the console thus far, you know, we make available via our API. So if you don't like the look, you don't like the limited customization of the branding that you can do with an IDCS console, don't like the sign-in, you know, and you got the technical know-how, you can leverage our IDCS API and customize it to suit your needs, right? So, and the way you'd go about that is you'd create an application, grant it the necessary rules that you want to do. So let's say you want a application that automates the user provisioning, or, you know, automatically removes users after X amount of time, right? You can create an application that would say, let's say user admin, right? And it would manage all that. But for this application, we just need it to have authenticated client and optionally, and also the me. And what me does is it allows the application to act on behalf of the user so that they have permissions for, say, getting their profile information, which will be showing in the web app. All right. We don't have any resources on the, or APIs that are being exposed on the application, but if you did, you could figure that here, and you could set the necessary scopes and, you know, token expiration times. Similarly, we don't have a web tier policy for this application, but if you did, you could figure that optionally here. You can specify the policy, whether or not it allows cores, you can define the resources. And finally, you can enforce grants as operations. It's not necessary for this application, so we'll just leave it blank. Okay. So once we've done all that, it'll pop up with the client ID and secret. Don't worry, this if you close this out and you forget about it or didn't write it down, you can always go back here, and this is where you can either show the secret or regenerate it. All right. The last step before or after creating the application, you need to activate it. Now I'm going to hesitate to do so since I just showed the client ID and secret publicly on this video. So we're just going to hold off and actually view the one I already created. See here, display my apps, users can request. Client ID, not going to show the secret, but similar configuration as before. Get the authenticated users and access to the APIs. In the users tab, this is where you can add specific users. So, you know, we got my default user, and then we have that user that has, you know, my name plus CC, right, for my email. Optionally, you can also specify groups that would be then assigned to the application. So instead of having to manage individual users, you can add users to group. If you're practicing role-based access control, users that belong to that group then have access to the application itself, right? So if we actually view one of the users, such as demo user, you saw that he wasn't previously assigned in the users tab, but he does belong to the user demo group, and thus he has access to these applications as well. All right. So we've already created our application. We've confirmed that it's active. What we need to do now is create a sign-in policy for this application. Now, the reason why we create a sign-in policy is because out of the box in IDCS, you will only have the default sign-in policy. And in the default sign-in policy, there's not a lot defined. It basically just means users can sign in through IDCS. None of the apps are specified because it's not necessary. Any app that isn't assigned a sign-in policy will use the default sign-in policy. We don't want that. We want to do, lock down and get more granular. I've already created one here, but I just want to show you what it looks like. So it just asks for the details. Here you'd create your sign-on rules. So here is where we can specify what identity provider they are authenticated. So you could choose Microsoft, Okta, or username password. So we'll just go with username password. Specify the group that they belong to, or if they're an administrator. So in the case that maybe you don't want your administrators having certain access to the application or shouldn't be there, you can specify that maybe administrators have to have prompt for an additional factor or have to use multi-factor. And these administrators are defined as they are in the administrator tabs. These are IDCS administrators. Optionally, you could specify specific users that you do not want. Let's say that we don't want demo user in the demo group to have access to the application, even though they belong to that group. You can optionally specify to block users. We talked a little bit about network parameters. This is where you'd specify them. So like if I wanted only traffic to originate from my device, we could specify only from this local IP address can users sign in. So if they pass all the other checks, but not this one, it'll say they're blocked by sign-in policy. Okay. And then we mentioned the adaptive security conditions. That's that risk score that I was talking about earlier. This is where you can set certain thresholds. Once they have a risk assessment, you can set them as, say, if they are, a certain threshold, like if they're highly suspicious, they've been using a VPN to move their geolocation around, they've failed to authenticate multiple times, you can act on conditions such as that. So you could either block them or you can deny the access, you can allow it. Maybe you prompt for re-authentication. So if they already have a single sign-on session, and they're coming from another application, regardless, you prompt for, ask them to sign in again, or you can use two-factor authentication. And you can actually specify how good that's for. Maybe you want them to sign in every week or every time. You can specify that. Right? So that's sign-on rules. And then finally, this is where you assign the application itself. Now, since I've already assigned the demo application, it doesn't show up here, but you would see a similar box like this, and you'd specify which ones that you want to assign. So in this case, we just did the autonomous data warehouse. So this policy would apply for that. I'm just going to remove it. Okay. So we've created it. But can't forget to activate it. So once you're done with everything and you're good with it, you can choose to activate it. I'm going to go ahead and remove it so we can look at the one that I've already created for this demo. So within this, I decided, we want to allow username password. We want to allow those that you sign in through Microsoft. we optionally have belongs to the two groups that are assigned to the application, which is administrators and demo group. We want them to sign in from any location, and we want them, once they've checked all this, to allow the sign in. And here we see the assigned apps. So I have a custom login, our demo sample node web app, and just the OCI console. So whenever a user attempts to sign into any of these apps through IDCS, we'll be using this, evaluating it against this sign-in policy. Okay. Make sure that the policy is active. And now that we've had the sign-in policy, I mentioned if you had multiple identity providers, you could also go here for IDP rules. And what this does is identity policies are only for defining what identity providers show up as an option when you sign in, right? So for our application, I only have username and password. This matches up with the sign-in policy, but it is entirely possible to define an IDP to show up that isn't supported by the sign-in rule. Or, you can have a sign-in rule that supports an IDP that isn't shown on the page. So like if they have an existing session, they can continue to access the web app. And here we show the two. All right. So now that we've created our sign-in policy, we've checked it, we can now actually access the web app itself and attempt to sign in. So since I already have a session, I go to the web page, click login. I should already use my existing session. Oh, sign-in policy. Maybe not. That's okay. We'll just try using a new session here. This is actually good because it can show off the login page. We've specified username and password to be as one of the options, and we also have Microsoft as one of them as well. Oops, I think I might have messed it up while I was going through the demo here. Let's just double check that real quick. So sign-in policies, custom one, sign-in rules. Okay. Should be allowed for the applications. We'll just deactivate this temporarily to show it off. Okay, well, there. This is showing since I'm currently signed in, it uses my login credentials from the existing session, and then I can view the details here as well. Now, I'm going to try I showed off the Microsoft one previously. So we're going to try to log in using a federated login to show how that works. So here we have the Microsoft login. I've created a user previously, provision. Just enter their password. And here we have a federated user. This is a user that originated from Azure AD, accessing the application that's being secured by IDCS, right? And so we see that they came from this IDP in Microsoft and their user information. Okay, it looks like we actually have a little time. So if we had time, I was gonna briefly show how that configuration looks for federating users from Microsoft. Microsoft provides a enterprise application from their catalog to support SSO and provisioning from their Azure AD. You can access it via this URL, the tutorial for it. We also have one for our own on by our A team. It's a good write-up. But the way that would look is you go to your Active Directory, go to your enterprise applications. I've already created one, and we'll be looking at demo. But just to search for it, you search Oracle, and then you choose the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Console. You can rename it as you see fit. I've already spun up a clean one for this demo. And what it looks like is you'll get a blank template just like this. You'll choose to set up a SAML one. It'll ask for these 3 fields. So in my case, that would be the entity ID. Oh yeah, it's just the reason it's giving me that error is because I already have an existing one configured. But what you just need is these 3 sign-in URLs. What this is this is your entity ID, the assertion consumer URL for IDCS, and this is just so that it can communicate via SAML. The sign-in URL, that's just where it redirects once you've logged in, right? Like once you've signed in, where do you go? In this case, we have it set to the OCI console. Okay. The real thing I want to note is once you get to this page, you have the option to download the Federation data XML. Once you download this, it's actually really simple to configure the IDP within IDCS. So what does it look like to add a new identity provider? So in this case, we have our existing Microsoft one, but it's going to yell at me again because I already have it configured. But just to show you, we'll take that should have had that recent XML file. You can add it in. Optionally, you could enter them manually if for whatever reason the XML works. In my experience, those other identity providers, typically you can work with. Once you've uploaded the metadata, you can specify the attribute matching. So in this case, we'll be using the name ID that comes from Azure AD as the user attribute, and we'll match that against the username that's in IDCS. We can actually also specify the format. So in the case where all of our users' names are our emails, we can say we expect it in an email format, right? Yeah, and here it's just yelling at me because this IDP already exists. But at the next page, you'd see, if we go and edit this one, you would see this page where it would give you the download link to download the metadata from IDCS so that you can upload to Microsoft. That way you wouldn't actually have to specify those individual URLs. And this is where you get the URLs that I previously put into Azure. Once you do that, you would then be prompted to test the application. And the way it does this, it'll just ask you to sign in. If you're successful, we'll just see, it should. So since we've already have a user that exists in IDCS and Microsoft, we can test this. If the connection's good, we'll see it loads. It might be because I'm currently already signed in as one of the users. It's giving me some grief, but note that you can always retest the application, and that way you can verify your configuration between Azure and IDCS. And I had already created a user, right, from previously called Provision, right? So let's just look at the existing one here. NATO. So within the Azure side, you'd have to specify the users and groups assigned to the application. So we got a show and tell, and we got me, and we got provision, right? And if you did want to set up provisioning, you would have to create a confidential application in IDCS that has access to user management and provide the client ID and secret here to the provisioning application here in Azure. And that's where you'd specify here. You'd specify the tenant URL, which is just the IDCS URL right here. And the client ID and secret that you saw me previously generate here with access to the IDCS APIs for, so let's say this one. We'd do the same configuration, we'd have them, and then we'd also specify the user admin role. So if we took client ID and secret, and base64 encoded them here, tested it, we could optionally specify our mappings for groups and users. But once that's done, users that are assigned to the application within Azure will be automatically provisioned every 45 minutes to IDCS. With that, talked about provisioning. I've showed off some of the provisioning, showed the application itself, how it showed some of the, excuse me, showed logging in, showing how SSO worked. I show how federation works. That's all I had for today for today's demo. You can now address any questions that we might have in the Q&A. Let's just see here. How do we access the auth token in the application? Okay. So if we wanted to access the auth token, actually, so the way you'd go about that, and I'm trying to pull up my Postman right now, we could specify to generate an access token or via our API. So like obtain access token. And I should also note that we have a Postman collection for the IDCS APIs. And it's also available as one of our tutorials. But when it comes down to it, you specify the host, which is the IDCS URL. At this endpoint, you take that client ID and secret that you get from the application that has the necessary roles for it. And then you just submit the client ID and secret, and you will obtain a access token. I'm not going to show it all, but this is what it looks like. And then with that access token, then you can perform other actions via the API, such as requesting a specific app, you get information about it, update it, create users if it has permission, etc. We want SSO between SaaS and PaaS, IDCS. Can you share any latest documentation on IDCS application creation and granting user and group access? As for specific documentation about IDCS, I don't have any on me at the moment, but we can make that available. I believe I covered actually the assigning users and groups to it. I will note, let's just look at one of the Oracle asks, one of the specific features of having or running Oracle apps on Oracle, right, is that within IDCS, we've already configured the roles. So in this case, like, we have a PaaS administrator, right? From here, we can assign users or groups as need be to those application roles within the Oracle apps itself. Okay. What else? How do we access the auth token back in the auth application? I believe your application would have to make a similar call to the IDCS endpoint for it. So you would store the client ID and secret either in, like, say, our Oracle Key Manager Vault or locally on the machine in order for it to request the auth token and refresh it as need be. How do functions services work when we run across clouds, organizations, Azure in terms of credentials? As it relates to specifically, let's say, Oracle functions, those users are actually managed by OCI IAM, or Identity Access Management within OCI. So while users could be provisioned by IDCS into OCI when you create them, right? The actual permissions for managing functions in there would be managed by the OCI IAM, by the policies defined for it, whether or not it's user principal or has access to the APIs for the OCI tenancy itself. In the Postman, when getting auth token, how do we get the exact auth token generated by the user in the session? For example, if I have my user logged into the app and now I want to use a token from the web app to make REST calls in the backend. Right. So you're basically asking for user sessions, yeah? Right. You can actually do that. That'd be more under the OAuth section, where you can obtain access credentials for clients or on behalf of them. That'd be more of accessing them and granting them necessary permissions within the, so going back here, configuring them, configuration, access to the API, maybe give them on behalf of the me so that the user can then ask to get access to the API. How to change the IDCS administrator, for example, in the case he/she leaves the company. Okay, so I talked briefly about administrators. So when you create your first, when IDCS is first created, there's one user. They are an identity domain administrator, and they're whoever was created with the account or assigned at the creation. If you want to change IDCS administrators, you can assign them, create them as a user in IDCS, and then just add them to the administrative role. This is good practice, is at least having one other admin in the event that one person leaves and you no longer have access to your application. But let's say maybe you don't want them to have the highest level of security. Maybe you just want them to manage your applications or specifically manage users such as groups, and you can specify admins as that. Hi, we use several, okay, hope that answered your question. We use several Oracle SaaS products, Cloud Commerce, Service Cloud, Cloud Demand Planning. For each of these applications is a separate IDCS access. Can all these be consolidated? Yes. The way I'm aware of going about doing that is actually you would federate the accounts with a single stripe of IDCS, right? So the way you do that is you would take your existing IDPs, because, let's say you get one with your Fusion Analytics, you get one for your Cloud Commerce, et cetera, as you mentioned, right? What you would do is you would add them as SAML IDPs to, let's say, a single source of truth IDCS stripe, one that manages all the identities that you want, and that way you can enable SSO across them. So what an effect would be is that you would add all of the separate IDCS stripes. Let's say IDCS Cloud Commerce. And then you can give it its icon so that it's easier, more identifiable. You would export the metadata from the IDCS stripe that comes with it, right? So we showed how you can view, here, you can get the metadata. You would upload it here. You would map the users as you would, we did with the Azure, test and activate it, right? And so once you do that, let's say you have the 5 various IDCS stripes, that's where you take advantage of the IDP policies and limit the amount that are visible. Let's say you only want your, Cloud Commerce IDCS stripes to sign into your Cloud Commerce, right? You've already defined all your users there, and you only want users that are defined there to access the application. That's when you would specify what IDPs show up for what application. All right. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, so the way you'd consolidate them is basically add them as all identity providers to a centralized IDCS stripe. And then you could perform SSL by synchronizing those accounts across them. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment. Let's see. Just give it a few moments, let any other questions show up. If not, we can move to close. Oh. How can we sell it? Are you talking about from an Oracle perspective, or you care to elaborate? Okay, hold on. How many access or users cloud? If you're talking about specific licensing, I don't have that information on me. And is there a hierarchy or chart infographic that shows all the access controls in one place? So in terms of chart infographic built in, no, there isn't, but that is not to say you can't build out your one leveraging the APIs. I mean, going back to even to the reports here, or actually, if we go into the node application, you know, based on the user, you can get the groups that they belong to, the application roles that they belong to, etc. Right? So based off that information, you could build out a chart or graph as you see fit. But in terms of out of the box, what you get in IDCS, there's no visual way to represent the hierarchy. And yeah, and it's not like you can nest groups within each other. So it's got a flat hierarchy already. But like say mapping users to their you know, specific grants or applications, you know, beyond looking at like what they have access to, you know, that's what's available.
All right. Thank you so much, Neil, for the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Since there are no more questions, I'd like to provide some brief information on what cloud coaching is and how you can request your own cloud coach. You can head to the next one.
Yep.
If you're experiencing a roadblock that isn't serious enough to warrant a service request, or maybe you just purchased OCI and are looking for an additional onboarding session, cloud coaching clinics pair you one-on-one with a cloud engineer to assist you on your cloud journey. We offer workshops and demos for deeper dives on our particular service, provide sample code, and provision and configuration services. Please visit the link on the slide to sign up, and I will also provide it into the chat now. If you enjoyed today's session, you can also sign up for next month's Code Innovate Optimize with Oracle's Cloud session. Here are also links to other developer events, your trial again, and we'd love to hear any feedback that you might have for us. Please feel free to send any questions about today's session, suggestions about future topics you'd like for us to cover, or how to request your own cloud coach to our email at cloudcoach_us_grp@oracle.com. And I will also provide those additional links in the chat now as well. I'd like to thank Neil again for today's presentation, and thank you all for spending your time with us today. Again, we'll make today's recording available on the session page and send the link out in an email as well. So I will go ahead and end this session. We hope you all have a great day, and we hope to see you again next time.